Behind the colossal shadow cast by Adolf Hitler lay not an empty void, but a throng of powerful men, the architects of atrocity. Among them, 5 names stand out, each a horrifying cog in the machinery of genocide. There was a crippled doctor of literature who wielded words to sow death more effectively than any bullet. A debonair architect who engineered the miracle of wartime industry, yet meticulously crafted a myth of his own innocence. An industrious slaver who reduced 5 million human lives to mere figures in a labor ledger. And 2 tyrants in the East who transformed fertile lands into laboratories for genocide and hellscapes of exploitation. They did not merely follow orders, they innovated in their brutality. Today, we unseal the files on 5 devils in human form: Goebbels, Speer, Sauckel, Greiser, and Koch. 1. Joseph Goebbels, the poisonous pen of the Reich. Paul Joseph Goebbels stands as one of the most central and sinister figures of the Third Reich. As the master propagandist and Gauleiter of Berlin, he was the chief architect of the Nazi mind, using his profound understanding of mass psychology and total control over all media to build the cult of Hitler, incite a venomous hatred against the Jewish people, and sustain the nation's will to fight to the bitter end. His life is a tragic testament to how a personal grievance can curdle into monstrous ideology, a life that culminated in one final fanatical act: the murder of his own children before his suicide in the Chancellery Garden. The story of Goebbels is a chilling study in how personal grievance can curdle into monstrous ideology. Born in 1897 into a devout, lower-middle-class Catholic family, his childhood was forever marked by a physical disability. At age 4, a severe bone infection left him with a deformed clubfoot, a source of deep shame and ridicule that would haunt him for life. Denied a soldier's path in World War I, he poured his intense ambition into academics. He was a brilliant student, devouring literature and history, and ultimately earning a doctorate in literature from the prestigious University of Heidelberg. He insisted on the title Dr. Goebbels, a shield of intellect against his physical insecurity. Yet for all his academic laurels, the post-war world had little use for the aspiring writer. His novels were rejected, his plays unproduced. It was in this crucible of professional failure and national chaos that Goebbels found his dark calling. Initially drawn to the more socialist wing of the nascent Nazi Party, his allegiance shifted irrevocably in 1926. Attending a party conference, he was utterly captivated by the magnetic charisma of Adolf Hitler. It was a quasi-religious conversion. "Adolf Hitler, I love you," he confessed to his diary, pledging an unwavering, absolute loyalty that would never falter. Hitler, ever the keen judge of useful talent, saw in Goebbels a weapon. He handed him the daunting task of conquering Red Berlin, a stronghold of communists and socialists. As the new Gauleiter, Goebbels unleashed a firestorm of propaganda. Through his newspaper Der Angriff, The Attack, and a relentless campaign of rallies, marches, and street brawls, he combined brilliant rhetoric with raw terror, systematically clawing a foothold for Nazism in the heart of the capital. When Hitler finally seized power in 1933, Goebbels was rewarded with his own custom-built ministry, becoming the Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. From this position, he became the absolute dictator of German culture. He controlled everything: the press, radio, films, theater, and arts. One of his first acts was the symbolic book burning of 1933, a declaration of war on intellect and freedom. He pioneered the use of radio and film to spread the Nazi gospel, glorifying Hitler and dehumanizing Jews with films like The Eternal Jew. As war descended upon Europe, his job became paramount: to maintain morale, justify aggression, and mask the truth of defeat. In the final apocalyptic days in the Berlin bunker, he remained by Hitler's side, appointed chancellor in the Führer's last will. His reign lasted a single day. On May 1st, 1945, he and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children, believing a world without National Socialism was unlivable, before taking their own lives in the Chancellery Garden. 2. Albert Speer, the Devil's Architect. Albert Speer remains one of the most complex and controversial figures of the Third Reich. Known as Hitler's architect and the miracle man of wartime production, he was an anomaly in the Nazi inner circle. He was a sophisticated, upper-class intellectual, seemingly driven not by ideology, but by boundless ambition and a uniquely intimate bond with Hitler. At Nuremberg, his calculated acceptance of overall responsibility saved him from the gallows, allowing him to spend the rest of his life crafting the Speer myth, the image of the apolitical technocrat, seduced by power but tragically ignorant of the regime's greatest crimes. It was a masterfully constructed lie. Unlike many of his brutish colleagues, Albert Speer was born not into the rabble, but into refinement in 1905, the son of a wealthy architect. He followed in his father's footsteps, pursuing an education in architecture that was both privileged and emotionally cold. Politics were a distant concern until a fateful evening in late 1930, when curiosity led him to a Nazi rally. There, like so many others, he was mesmerized by Hitler's voice and vision. He saw not a vulgar demagogue, but a man who could restore order and greatness, and in early 1931, he joined the party. His talent quickly brought him to Hitler's attention. After a series of minor commissions, his true breakthrough came with the design of the 1934 Nuremberg Party Rally. His creation of the Cathedral of Light, a nocturnal spectacle of 152 anti-aircraft searchlights pointed skyward, enthralled Hitler, who harbored his own grandiose architectural dreams. So began a unique and intimate partnership. Hitler saw in Speer a kindred spirit, an artist who could translate his megalomaniacal visions into stone and steel. He appointed Speer Inspector General of Buildings, tasking him with the colossal project of redesigning Berlin into Germania, the future capital of the world. This dream was built on a foundation of persecution. Speer's office was directly involved in evicting thousands of Jewish families from their homes to clear the way for his monumental avenues. His career took a dramatic turn in 1942, when, following the death of the armaments minister, Hitler appointed him to the role. In a display of organizational genius, Speer streamlined the German war economy, tripling armaments production despite relentless Allied bombing. But this miracle was paid for with a terrible price: the brutal exploitation of millions of slave laborers. He worked hand in glove with the slave master Fritz Sauckel, demanding ever more workers for his factories, fully aware of the inhumane conditions in which they toiled. After the war, this architect of both monuments and misery stood trial at Nuremberg. With a shrewd performance of contrition, he escaped the noose and received a 20-year prison sentence. His best-selling memoirs, written in and after his time in Spandau prison, cemented his myth as the good Nazi. It was only decades later that historians would fully dismantle this facade, revealing him as a knowing and indispensable accomplice to the regime's horrors.
3. Fritz Sauckel, the Reich's chief slaver. Ernst Fritz Sauckel was one of the regime's less famous but most consequential monsters. As the plenipotentiary general for labor, he was the architect of the largest slave labor program in history, a vast human trafficking operation that fed the German war machine. He was responsible for hunting down, deporting, and enslaving over 5 million people. His name is synonymous with the brutal exploitation that underpinned Speer's production miracle, a crime for which he was justly hanged at Nuremberg. The architect of this continental slave trade rose from the humblest of origins. Born in 1994, Fritz Sauckel left school at 15 to work in the Merchant Marines. Captured at sea during World War I, he spent years in a French POW camp, an experience that filled him with bitter nationalism. After the war, he returned to a defeated and chaotic Germany, working in a factory and seething with resentment. He found his purpose in the Nazi Party, which he joined in 1923 as an old fighter. A fanatical and loyal organizer, he caught Hitler's eye and was appointed Gauleiter of Thuringia in 1927. He ruled the region as his personal fiefdom, ruthlessly crushing opposition and proving his absolute devotion to the Führer. His defining moment came in March 1942, when Germany, desperate for manpower to fuel its war on the Eastern Front, Hitler appointed Sauckel to a new, powerful position, granting him near-dictatorial authority to procure laborers from all occupied territories. Sauckel launched into his task with savage efficiency. When initial calls for volunteers failed, he instituted a reign of terror. His agents conducted brutal roundups across Europe, in streets, cinemas, and villages, tearing people from their families. These millions were packed into cattle cars for nightmarish journeys to the Reich, where they were treated as subhuman. They endured starvation, disease, and constant brutality while working to death in German factories and farms. Sauckel was the indispensable partner to Albert Speer. While Speer set the quotas, Sauckel delivered the human bodies. He was fully aware of the barbarity of his system, openly demanding that the workers be exploited to the maximum. At Nuremberg, he tried to portray himself as a mere economic planner concerned for the workers' welfare, a claim the judges dismissed as utterly preposterous in the face of overwhelming evidence. On October 16, 1946, the man who had turned 5 million lives into statistics met his end on the gallows.
4. Arthur Greiser, the Butcher of the Warteland. Arthur Greiser stands as one of the most fanatical and sadistic enforcers of Nazi racial theory. As the absolute ruler of the Warteland, an annexed region of Poland, he unleashed a systematic campaign of genocide and Germanization with a personal and venomous ferocity. He was a true believer who sought to create a model Nazi province, perfectly cleansed of all Polish and Jewish elements. To achieve this, he pioneered some of the regime's most horrific methods of destruction, personally overseeing the deaths of hundreds of thousands before being captured and publicly executed for his crimes. Greiser's venomous ideology was not born in a Munich beer hall, but forged in the ethnic crucible of his birthplace. Born in 1897 in a Prussian province with a large Polish population, he grew up steeped in ethnic animosity, which festered into a lifelong, pathological hatred of Poles. A veteran of the Imperial Navy and the right-wing Freikorps, he found a home in the Nazi Party. Lacking charisma, but possessing boundless ambition and cruelty, he rose under the patronage of Heinrich Himmler, eventually becoming the head of government in the free city of Danzig. There, he honed his aggressive anti-Polish policies in the years leading up to the war. His true reign of terror began after the 1939 invasion of Poland. Hitler appointed him Gauleiter and Reich governor of the newly created Warteland. Given a free hand, Greiser transformed the region into his personal laboratory for genocide. His program was threefold. First, the mass expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Poles and Jews, driven from their homes with nothing but the clothes on their backs to make way for German settlers. Second, the subjugation of the remaining Poles, who were stripped of all rights, their culture and religion systematically destroyed, and their existence reduced to that of slaves. And third, the complete annihilation of the Jews. He established the infamous Uj ghetto, a sealed-off hell of starvation and disease. More chillingly, he was an innovator in mass murder. Under his authority, the very first extermination camp, Chelno, began operations in late 1941, using specially designed gas vans to murder tens of thousands. He ruled his domain with an iron fist, his brutality so extreme it was noted even by other Nazi officials. When the Red Army advanced, he fled, but was captured by American forces and handed over to Poland. Tried in the city he once terrorized, he was found guilty of genocide. In July 1946, Arthur Greiser was publicly hanged, a grim and fitting end for the man who had turned a vibrant land into a graveyard. Number 5. Erich Koch, the corrupt tyrant of Ukraine. Among a gallery of villains, Erich Koch stands out for his sheer, unvarnished brutality and insatiable greed. As the Gauleiter of East Prussia, and most infamously the Reichskommissar of Ukraine. He instituted a regime of exploitation and terror that was legendary for its barbarity, even by Nazi standards. He viewed the Slavic peoples as nothing more than cattle to be worked to death, and their lands as a treasure chest to be plundered for the Reich and for himself. Responsible for the deaths of millions, his life ended not on the gallows, but in a strange and unsettling anticlimax, dying of old age in prison. Born in 1896, Erich Koch was a railway worker and World War I veteran who, like many of his generation, was radicalized by Germany's defeat. He joined the Nazi Party early on, a brawling and ambitious organizer who rose through the ranks to become Gauleiter of East Prussia in 1928. There, he established himself as a corrupt local tyrant, fiercely loyal to Hitler, which shielded him from the consequences of his venality. His true capacity for evil was unleashed following the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, when Hitler appointed him Reichskommissar of the vast and fertile territory of Ukraine. From his first day in power, Koch made his intentions clear. "I am known as a brutal dog," he declared. "Our job is to suck from Ukraine all the goods we can." He rejected any notion of winning local support, instituting a policy of pure subjugation. His rule was a catalogue of horrors. He oversaw the systematic seizure of grain that led to mass starvation. He worked with Fritz Sauckel to round up millions of Ukrainians for slave labor in Germany. He shut down schools and universities, declaring that the population only needed to know how to read German signs. And he presided over the civil administration during the Holocaust on Ukrainian soil, where some of the war's worst massacres, such as Babi Yar, took place. All the while, he enriched himself, looting priceless art and treasures. His reign of terror was so savage, it actually proved counterproductive, strengthening the partisan resistance against German occupation. But for a man who dealt death on such a scale, fate reserved a bizarre final chapter. After fleeing at the war's end, he was captured in 1949 and extradited to Poland. There, in 1959, he was tried for his crimes against the Polish population and sentenced to death. Yet, the sentence was never carried out. For decades, he languished in a Polish prison, his executions repeatedly postponed, officially due to poor health. A popular theory persists that he was kept alive because authorities believed he knew the secret location of the looted, priceless Amber Room. And so, Erich Koch, one of history's most prolific mass murderers, lived on, finally dying of natural causes in his cell in 1986, at the age of 90, a quiet end that stands as a haunting insult to his millions of victims.